Evelyn had 14 children in her care and 60 days to find them a home that wasn't hers to keep. The orphanage had belonged to Walter Ames, a decent man, gone now, and his son had written 4 sentences and called the matter settled. A businessman wanted the property. A hotel, he said. The children would be distributed across the county like the word meant nothing. Every door she tried closed, until a rancher she hadn't met sent firewood ahead of a hard winter, and sat at her kitchen table every evening after that, and something grew between them that neither of them had planned on. The morning Henry Ames came to the orphanage, he wore a good coat and held his hat in both hands, and spoke with the careful courtesy of a man who wants to deliver bad news without being remembered as the one who delivered it. Evelyn put the kettle on and told Annie to take the younger ones to the yard. Annie went. She stood in the doorway for another 30 seconds first. Henry said the property would be sold. There was a buyer. She would have 60 days. His father had spoken well of her, and he hoped she understood the position he was in. He turned his hat once and left. She stood at the kitchen window until she was ready. Then she went to find 14 children and tell them the ground was shifting under them again. She found Harvey Cole 2 days later on the main street. She had asked around, gotten a name, and when she saw him she crossed directly. He was a broad man, somewhere in his 40s, with the unhurried posture of someone who has been doing hard work long enough that he has stopped noticing it. He stopped when she approached. "Mr. Cole." She looked at him straight. "Your man brought firewood to the orphanage ahead of the winter. I wanted to thank you myself." He looked somewhere past her shoulder. "It was nothing. There are 14 children in that building." She held his gaze. "It wasn't nothing. I'd like to have you for supper this evening if you have no reason not to." He considered this briefly. "I'll come," he said. He came at 6. Tom and Peter were fighting over the left bench when he walked in. Tom won. Peter sat at the end and regarded his bowl with the expression of a boy who intends to raise the matter again tomorrow. Harvey stood just inside the door until Evelyn told him to sit and pointed him to the small table by the window. Annie put her chin in her hand and studied him from across the long table. "You're the firewood man," she said. "I suppose I am." "Miss Ward said we're not to sleep in our stockings anymore." Evelyn said her name. "Well, she did." Harvey looked at his hands. The corner of his mouth moved once and went back to where it had been. After the children were in bed, she poured coffee, and they sat at the small table and talked about the coming winter, a water rights dispute, 2 properties east of his, the state of the county roads. He was not a man who filled silence. She had 11 years of practice letting it sit. He came back 4 days later. The table was set when he arrived. By the second week, he knew not to sit on the left bench before Tom and Peter had finished with it. He knew Ruthie would trade her carrots to anyone within reach if Evelyn's back was turned, that Joseph was always less hungry than he should have been, that Clara needed the dormitory door left open exactly 3 inches at bedtime, or the whole house heard about it at 10 o'clock. One evening he reached for the water pitcher before Annie had to ask. She told him where the cups were kept, which he already knew, and Evelyn said her name from the stove, and Annie said she was only helping, and Evelyn said she knew what helping looked like. Harvey kept his face level. Joseph, beside him, did not entirely manage it. He had started bringing things the orphanage needed without being asked. A bag of nails, a coil of rope. One afternoon, while the children were at lessons, he fixed the east shutter and came inside when he was done. She handed him coffee without turning around. He drank it at the window. There were 4 small handprints on the glass at child height, from the outside pressed against the frame. He looked at them for a moment. He meant to say something and did not find the right shape for it, and then the moment was gone, and he set the cup down and went back to his ranch. He mentioned his wife one evening in November, in the context of a hard first winter on the ranch. She listened and did not reach for it. He did not ask about her past either, not that evening, not any after. She had been asked before by men who wanted the full accounting of what she had given up. His not asking was its own information, and she received it without comment. A Wednesday evening, supper cleared. Annie came to the kitchen doorway with a book against her chest, and found Evelyn at the wash basin with both hands occupied. Harvey was still at the small table with his coffee. Annie looked at him, at the book, at him. "Mr. Cole," she held it out. "Will you read to me?" He looked at the book. He set his coffee down and held out his hand for it. He read without rushing, one finger on the line. Annie pressed against his arm before the second page. Clara appeared in the doorway and stood at the edge of the lamplight without coming in, holding her rag. Then one of the younger boys. They stood there the way children stand near something they have not yet decided about. Evelyn dried her hands and passed the doorway on her way to the accounts. She did not stop. She sat at the table with the ledger, and the cold was settling into the yard outside the window, and Harvey's voice came steady from the other room, and Clara's footsteps crossed the floor, and there was the sound of her climbing onto the bench without asking. Evelyn looked at the ledger. The numbers did not change. Sam was at the far end of the room with a bootlace he was repairing with cord because he had not asked for a new one and would not. He said nothing during the reading. He did not leave. The following evening he was in the doorway. The evening after, at the far end of the table. He moved closer over 10 days, and one evening sat down beside Harvey without a word, and Harvey turned the page and kept reading. The following morning Sam came to breakfast, and his bootlace was whole, real leather, replaced, sitting on top of his boot beside his bowl. He looked at it. He looked across the table. Harvey was putting bread on Joseph's plate, and did not look up. Sam put the bootlace on. He left the cracked blue cup beside Harvey's coffee that evening, and that was the whole of what passed between them on the matter. Margaret Howell had been on the welcoming committee when Evelyn first came to run the orphanage, and had never entirely relinquished the seniority that implied. She arrived at the dry goods counter on a Friday with the manner of a woman performing a duty she finds regrettable but necessary. She said that people were talking, that an undefined arrangement had a way of defining itself in the public mind, that the children were at an impressionable age, that she would hate to see anyone's reputation suffer, Evelyn's or the children's or, she paused, Mr. Cole's. She said it with real warmth, which was the precise instrument of it. She left without buying anything. Evelyn counted out her coins and walked home. In the yard, Sam was trying to fix the gate hinge with a piece of wire that was not right for it. He had been at it for 20 minutes. She watched him work until the hinge held for long enough for him to test it, and then swung loose again. She went out. "Sam." He looked up. She held out her hand for the wire. He gave it to her, and she showed him the angle that would hold and gave it back, and he did it again, and this time it caught. He tested it twice. He went back inside without saying anything, and she stood at the gate in the cold for a moment before following. That evening, after the children were in bed, she told Harvey the orphanage's monthly numbers, what came in, what the children needed, the gap between them, the 2 donors who had stopped. She told him because it was practical, and because Margaret Howell's voice was still in the room with her, and she was not going to let it make her smaller. He listened. He asked one question about the county support arrangement. She answered it. "You've been running this on luck and stubbornness," he said. "Mostly stubbornness," she replied. He looked at his coffee. "That tracks," he said, which was as close as he came to a smile on a serious subject. The letter from Henry Ames came on a Monday. Porter's offer had been accepted. The closing was scheduled in 30 days. She was to vacate by the end of that period. She was thanked for her years of service to the community. She told the children at supper that evening, plainly, without softening it to nothing. Annie's eyes went wide, and then immediately to Evelyn's face. Sam looked at the table. Joseph set down his bread. Tom and Peter were for once not fighting over anything. One of the younger ones asked what vacate meant. Evelyn said it meant they would need to find somewhere else to live. The younger one asked if that meant all of them together. She said she was working to make sure it did not come to that. She kept her voice level and her hands flat on the table. When supper was done, she sent them to bed and stood at the wash basin until the house was quiet. Harvey came the following night. She told him across the table. He listened and asked 2 questions about the timeline and drank his coffee. "I'm sorry," he said. She kept her hands around her cup. "There's still time." She wrote letters. She went to the council twice. She went to the church. The minister said he would pray on it. A merchant she had counted on looked at the floor when she raised it. The council said it was private property and outside their purview. Edwin Porter had money and a plan, and the quiet approval of men who measured a town's health by what it was becoming rather than what it already held. The doors closed, each one softly, nobody wanting to be the one who shut it. He went out before first light on a Thursday, frost on the grass. He walked the full fence line from the north pasture to the creek, and back up the eastern edge the way he had walked it 1,000 mornings. 300 acres, 16 years of work that ran the way he had built it to run. He stood at the far fence and looked back at the house for a long time. Tom and Peter and the bench, Joseph and the bread. The wire Sam had used on the bootlace because he would not ask for better. Clara's 3-inch door. Annie telling him where the cups were kept. A woman with her hands in the wash basin and 14 children between her and whatever else her life might have held. He went to town that afternoon and found a land agent he trusted and told him to put the ranch on the market at a fair price and move it quickly. He went to the bank after that and confirmed the numbers would hold. He told his 2 hands what was coming and gave them a month's wages ahead and said he was sorry and meant it. He did not go to Evelyn that evening. The closing was scheduled for a Saturday morning. The county clerk was present. Henry Ames, 2 council members. Porter arrived with his lawyer and the settled confidence of a man completing a formality. Harvey came in after Porter had taken his seat and named his number. Higher. His voice flat and even. Porter looked at him the way a man looks when he has not been contradicted in recent memory. He said sentiment was an expensive habit. He looked at the council members and said that when a man sold his land to buy a building, he had no practical use for it was reasonable to ask what he believed he was acquiring, and that in his experience a woman who permitted such an arrangement understood the nature of it even if she declined to say so in public. The clerk looked at his paper. One of the council members shifted his chair. Harvey kept his eyes on Henry Ames. "The number stands," he said. "Close it." Henry looked at the 2 figures. He closed the folder. Harvey came to the orphanage that afternoon. The children were in the yard. Annie and Ruthie were in the middle of something that had started as a carrot. Sam was on the fence watching without appearing to watch. Harvey came through the front door. Evelyn was at the table with the ledger. He set the deed on the table in front of her. Then he set a second paper beside it, a trust document drawn up that morning, putting the building in the orphanage's name. His name was on it only as the grantor. She looked at both papers. She looked at him standing with his hat in both hands. "Harvey," her voice careful. "What did you do?" "Sold the ranch." He said it the way he said most things, plainly, without softening it. Enough to outbid Porter and put the deed in the orphanage's name. "I'll have enough left for a small cabin north of town. I'll manage fine." She was quiet. On the shelf above the window, 16 cups hung in a row. She had put the 16th up 3 weeks ago, and he had looked at it the first evening after and said nothing, and she had said nothing, and neither of them had raised it since. "There are 16 cups on that shelf," she said. He looked at the shelf. "There were 15 when you first came to supper." He looked at the 16th cup, then at her. She kept her eyes on the shelf. Outside, Annie's voice rose and Sam's dropped under it, and Annie was quieter. "A cabin north of town," she said. "That's a place for one person." "I know the number I used." She turned to face him, straight and level, the way she faced everything. "The children need you here." A beat, then quieter, the words costing her something to say plainly. "So do I." He held her gaze. Outside, the pump handle dropped with a hollow ring. "I can stay," he said slowly. "Not as a man passing through. Not as a convenience." He turned his hat once more. "I can stay as your husband, if you want me." She looked at this man who had walked a cold morning alone and done his numbers without telling her, and come to her without speeches or conditions, who had moved his elbow for a cracked blue cup and read 2 chapters when one was asked for, and stood in a room where Porter had said what he'd said and answered it with 4 words. "Yes," she said, quietly, completely, with nothing held back. His hand found hers on the table and closed around it. Outside, the yard was loud and cold and going gold in the late light, and neither of them moved for a moment. That evening, Harvey sat at the head of the table. Tom and Peter fought over the left bench. Tom won. Ruthie attempted a carrot trade, and Evelyn said her name once without looking up. Joseph gave half his bread to Clara, and Harvey put another piece on Joseph's plate without breaking stride, and Joseph looked at it and looked at Harvey's back and ate it. Harvey read after supper. Annie asked for a second chapter. Sam moved his chair closer without being invited, and Harvey made room without ceremony, the way he always had. Evelyn sat across the room with her mending. Clara came and leaned against her knee and went heavy with sleep, and Evelyn's hand moved to the girl's hair. When the children were in bed, she and Harvey sat on the porch with their coffee in the cold. The stars were hard and bright over the tree line. From the yard, one of his horses, he had brought 2 over that afternoon, no discussion, shifted in the pen and settled. Down the hall, the dormitory door stood open 3 inches exactly. And that was the story of Evelyn, Harvey, and the orphanage. Let me know in the comments how this one felt. Thank you.